Sorry.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Reviews. We are so excited to talk about Shin Godzilla tonight. We thank you for hanging out with us in this conversation, and we hope and encourage you to be a part of the conversation, leaving comments, engaging, let us know your thoughts on the movie, on us, whatever. And if you really enjoyed it, if you really enjoyed what you're watching and listening to, please rate and review wherever you podcast. And if you really super duper love it, go ahead and tell a friend. Let them know what we're doing here and just spread the love. It's our best form of advertising. So thank you again, Matt. What else is up?
Yeah, we're wrapping up guest star filled August. It's been great to have Frank on the podcast. He talked about Rodan with us last month. We have him here to talk about Shin Godzilla from 2016 tonight. So thank you again, Frank, for joining us. It's great to have new perspectives and voices on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on again. I'm sure that me being here will increase your downloads with all the Frank fans out there getting excited to listen to my thoughts on Shin Godzilla.
Frank fans, you heard the man. Let him know you're out there. All right, I'm done now. Okay.
We're counting on it. If it doesn't increase our listenership, we're never inviting you back again, but we'll see what happens. I'm totally kidding. It's always great fun to talk to you about movies. Sorry. Yeah, so it's been great to have some guest stars on. We also talked to Armando a couple weeks ago about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. Definitely hoping to have more guest stars in the near future, so kind of, stay tuned about that. We have a lot of good stuff coming up too. In September, we're going to be talking about a movie which a lot of people have been talking about recently, Prey, which is the recent spinoff of the Predator series. So not only will we be talking about Prey, but obviously the numerous other Predator movies, Alien versus Predator Requiem, unfortunately. So yeah, stay tuned for that. It should be a really, really good conversation. We'll also be talking about John Carpenter's Vampires later in September, kind of breaking into the vampire sort of subgenre, which we have not talked about yet on Camp Kaiju. So yeah, a lot of good stuff coming up. And then it's October, and we're going to be full on the horror vibe. Hopefully going to have Frank back around that time as well to talk about a movie which I know he likes a lot, but we'll kind of, keep that under wraps for the future.
Yeah.
So
hold your horses there, Matt.
Yeah, no, I don't want to give everything away right now. Yeah, so thanks again, Frank. This was your recommendation to talk about Shin Godzilla. So are you able to talk about why you wanted to bring this up in the podcast?
Yeah. So this one was one that I did not know existed. I had no idea, about it coming out or anything like that. And then my brother asked me one day if I wanted to go see it with him. It was playing for what I believe was just like a one-night showing, like in the middle of the week at one of the Marcus cinemas around us. Yeah, he invited me out, and I had also gone with him a couple years prior to see the 2014 American Godzilla movie, which I think was just called Godzilla. Which, I thought was kind of like a mediocre Hollywood blockbuster. And I kind of expected this to be more of the same, but, maybe slightly better since it was actually from Toho Studios and everything. But yeah. I just figured it'd be nice to see my brother. And I was actually kind of really surprised by how ambitious the movie is and, how stylish it is in some ways. And that there's really a lot more going on in it than just the, monsters smashing up a city type stuff that you'd expect from a Godzilla movie. So it's a really interesting reboot that I think takes the series in a totally different direction. And, they really kind of did their own thing with it while still kind of paying respect to some of the classic Godzilla tropes and traditions and everything.
Yeah. Right on, man. And I was not so lucky to see this in theaters. In 2016, I still really wasn't, I had kind of lost my way from Godzilla and the Kaiju genre. Hadn't seen them since I was kids, right? And then I went to visit New York City, and it's where my brother was living. And I watched it with him and some friends in just their, Brooklyn apartment on just killing an afternoon, because what else is there to do in New York, right? And I was just blown away. I was like, what? This is where the franchise is now since I was a kid. Holy crap. I want more of this. This is good stuff. Hadn't seen it since then. And I think it still holds up now that I'm a little older. My critical eye is a little sharper. There are some things, of course, you can nitpick, but I'm excited to get into this conversation.
Me too. I was blown away. I've been excited to watch some of the more recent reboots of various kaiju franchises, especially this one, obviously. But I didn't really know what to expect. I thought maybe it would be kind of like a rehash of the original, and like Frank said, maybe kind of just like a little cliched, like pretty close to the Hollywood retellings. But this goes in a bunch of very strange, unexpected directions. It's unexpectedly ambitious, I think. Certainly flawed in some ways, but such a unique and ultimately, yeah, a really successful, interesting movie, I think.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, now that we all love it, I'll see you next week, right? No. Okay, we'll go into the plot synopsis. Okay, so spoiler alert, just putting that out there, but we'll run through this plot here for you guys. And here we go. When the Japanese Coast Guard investigates an abandoned yacht in Tokyo Bay, their boat is destroyed and an underground road tunnel is flooded. After seeing a viral video of the incident, Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Rando Yaguchi theorizes that it was caused by a living creature. His theory is confirmed when news reports show a massive tail emerging from the ocean. Shortly thereafter, the creature, a large, awkward monster that flounders more than walks, moves inland and crawls through Tokyo in the midst of an inadequate evacuation. The creature leaves a path of destruction and numerous casualties and evolves then into a bipedal red-skinned form before it begins to overheat and thus return to the sea.
So the government officials focus on military strategy and civilian safety, while Yaguchi is put in charge of a task force to research the creature. Due to high radiation readings from the monster's path, the group realizes that it is energized by nuclear fission. The US sends a special envoy, Kayoko Ann Patterson, who reveals that a disgraced, vehemently anti-nuclear zoology professor, Goro Maki, had been studying mutations caused by radioactive contamination and theorized the appearance of the creature, but he was disbelieved by both American and Japanese scientific circles. The US then prevented him from making his conclusions public. The abandoned yacht discovered in Tokyo Bay belonged to Maki, and he left his research notes jumbled into a code in the boat before disappearing.
The creature, named Godzilla after Maki's research, reappears in its fourth form, now twice its original size, and makes landfall en route for Tokyo. The Japan self-defense forces mobilize, but their attacks have no effect, and they are forced to withdraw when Godzilla breaks through their defenses into the city. The US intervenes with a massively destructive airstrike plan, prompting the evacuation of civilians and government personnel. US bombers wound Godzilla, but the kaiju recovers quickly and responds with highly destructive atomic rays fired from its mouth and dorsal plates. The helicopter carrying the Prime Minister and top government officials is destroyed, as well as incinerating and irradiating large swaths of Tokyo. Depleting its energy, Godzilla enters a dormant state and becomes immobile.
Yaguchi's team discovers that Godzilla's plates and blood work as a cooling system and theorize that they could use a coagulating agent to freeze it. After analyzing tissue samples, they find that Godzilla is an ever-evolving creature able to reproduce asexually. The United Nations, aware of this, informs Japan that thermonuclear weapons will be used against Godzilla should the Japanese fail to subdue it on their own in a few days. Evacuations are ordered in prep for the nuclear attack. Unwilling to see nuclear weapons detonated in Japan again, Patterson uses her political connections to buy time for Yaguchi's team, who the interim government has little faith in.
But Yaguchi's team has a breakthrough when they decipher Goro Maki's encoded research using origami. That's kind of a flashback to an origami bird, which we see on the yacht in the very first shot of the movie. They adjust their plan and procure the means to conduct their deep freeze plan with international support. Mere hours before the planned nuclear attack, Japan enacts the deep freeze plan. Godzilla is provoked into expending its atomic breath and energy against American drones.
The team then detonates explosives in nearby buildings and in trains sent towards Godzilla's feet. Godzilla is knocked down. Tankers full of coagulant are dispatched to inject it into Godzilla's mouth. Though many are killed in the process, Godzilla is frozen solid. In the aftermath, it is discovered that the Godzilla fallout has a very short half-life and that Tokyo can soon be reconstructed. The international community agrees to cancel the nuclear attack, but has the new Japanese government agree that, in the event of Godzilla's reawakening, an immediate thermonuclear strike will be executed. On Godzilla's tail, humanoid creatures appear frozen in the process of emerging.
Ooh, yeah, it ends on a haunting note, I would say. That still leaves me scratching my head, honestly. I would love to hear your thoughts about that a little later on. Yeah, big question mark there. Who was in this movie? There were, I don't know, dozens of speaking characters. Are they all consequential to the plot, to the story moving forward? Not necessarily, but they are actors worthy of recognition. So we'll try to go through them and do our best with the Japanese pronunciations. We humbly beg your forgiveness, listeners and viewers, as we go through it. First and foremost, the film was directed by Hideki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. Anno also wrote the screenplay. He is most well known for creating the anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion from the mid-90s and subsequent films after that original series. Hugely influential, not only in the anime genre, but animation. And I think it is highly regarded just as, storytelling in and of itself. I'm sure we'll get to that maybe at some point in the pod. But he was creating Shin Godzilla with Shinji Higuchi, who sort of his partner in crime on some other projects as well. Higuchi directed the special effects of Shin Godzilla. He was acclaimed for directing the two-part live-action adaptation of Attack on Titan in 2015, so the year right before Shin came out. Attack on Titan is also a well-regarded title. Higuchi became interested in movies after touring Toho Studios with his aunt, who worked on commercials at the studio when he was a junior high student. His first work for Toho was actually, this is a callback to a previous Camp Kaiju episode, he was an assistant modeler on The Return of Godzilla. So I love the connections in the Godzilla universe. Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah. A lot of other good cast and crew on this movie as well. We have Mihiro Maeda, who provided the new design for Godzilla, which is just such a memorable, creative, honestly pretty scary design, especially as it goes through its various forms in the movie. Takayuki Takeya provided the sketches and digital models for the new Godzilla. The digital cinematography is by Kosuke Yamada, and the music this time around is by Shiro Sagisu. There's sort of an asterisk there because a lot of the music in this movie is recycled from Akira Ifukube's original scores throughout the Godzilla movies for the previous several decades. Very memorable scores, incredible music. It's a pleasure to hear it in this movie as well.
Indeed. Yeah, Frank, you can jump in with the actors if you want.
All right. Let's see how many of these I can pronounce accurately. We've got Hiroki Hasegawa as Rando Yaguchi, which I love that character name, Rando Yaguchi, who's the deputy chief cabinet secretary. He's kind of probably the closest thing this movie has to a protagonist, I would say. And then we've got Yutaka Takanuchi as Hideki Akasaka, who's the aide to the prime minister. We've got Satomi Ishihara as Kyoko Ann Patterson, who's the special envoy to the US president. and a lot of her dialogue is in English, although she was not fluent in English before the filming began. I'd say she does a pretty good job with the English lines that she does have here. Better job, honestly, than some of the native English speakers do with some of the lines.
That is true.
Mansai Nomura plays Godzilla through motion capture. And then there's a bunch of cameos and bit parts.
Yeah, right. That's a great point about the English language lines and dialogue in the film. I agree. I think Ishihara does a really good job as Kyoko, bringing, she has screen presence that is palpable. When it comes to her lines, not necessarily her delivery. I just feel like I had some qualms with the English dialogue in general.
Yeah,
they seemed a little corny, or like, I don't know, they just didn't seem as refined maybe as they would have been, if other than the Japanese lines. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a scene in particular where she's on, like toward the end of the movie, where she's on just kind of like I think just like a grounded plane, talking to the guy who I guess is supposed to be the American president. And yeah, that scene in particular is just really awkward and very very poorly acted on the part of the guy playing the president.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very stilted. You can kind of tell that it's still just like, let's read the words directly off the script and not put any like feeling or emotion or logic into them, really. You can tell that like yeah, they didn't really know, I think, what they were like going for in those scenes, aside from like pushing the plot and some of the like themes along. And you can really tell that.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, I just gotta say, it's not just Shin Godzilla. If you watch any older classic Godzilla film and any of those that feature a Western actor saying English lines, none of them are good. They're all so stilted.
It's a weird recurring flaw. I don't know exactly why that happens, but
Just
yeah.
a dearth of Western actors in Japan, apparently.
It's that's one of the few, in terms of the performances, like I just feel like the cast is so huge and there are so many different characters that like, not very many of them leave a mark in both a good and a bad way, I guess. Like none of them really stick out in terms of like, emotional impact, but also like if you're not interested in a character, you can just like move on to the next one and like the next scene. So it's both a good and a bad thing maybe in this movie.
Yeah, I think it's less about the individual characters than it is just about them as sort of a collective, which I think is actually effective in a way, because it shows you how with so many of these different people all working on the same problem, it just shows like really does a good job of putting across the enormity of the problem and just how big a crisis this is, that like seemingly every person in Japan is working on it in some capacity.
Yeah, I think that's
Sorry.
sorry, Vincent. I think like that's true of the scenes in which there are like seemingly hundreds or maybe even thousands of extras. Like it's really impressive, like the scale of this movie and like the set pieces they were able to set up. Like the scenes where people are being evacuated from various areas as Godzilla like makes its rampage throughout the country. Seemingly like they had just like unlimited extras and like actors and resources at their disposal. I think you make a really good point that it's kind of about the collective, not only of like the government and the scientists that are trying to solve the situation, but also like the population as a whole and how it affects them. It's a really interesting kind of, more collective spin on the story, I think.
And I know it's certainly a justifiable reason for including such a large cast, because oftentimes a movie like this will have a large ensemble cast, and it's often a weak point because there are superfluous characters who do not need to be there, who are only there to die, essentially, which is fun, but as far as like tight narratives, it weakens it. Not necessarily the case with Shin Godzilla. So yeah, that's a good choice on the creator's part. speaking of creators and their parts, we can go into production background and why they even made this movie, if you guys are feeling up to it.
Sure, unless you want to do the Bandits Emporium thing first.
I think I should do the Bandits Emporium thing. So I don't know if you've all heard, but banditsemporium.com is the official t-shirt sponsor of Camp Kaiju. You can visit banditsemporium.com. You can hit the link for that website in our bio to check out some pretty cool monster-inspired t-shirts. Even cooler is part of the proceeds when you buy a t-shirt, go to supporting Matt and I on Camp Kaiju so we can bring guests like Frank to the show. If going the t-shirt route isn't your thing, you can just check out our Patreon and support us there as well. But banditsemporium.com, really honestly, go check it out. Do yourself a favor. As they say, we sell shirts. As Camp Kaiju says, we like googly eyes. What?
Yeah. I was hoping we would say very different things, and I was not disappointed. That worked out perfectly. But you can do that again. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Okay. I still want to hear what you said. Banditsemporium.com. As they say, we sell shirts. As Camp Kaiju says, we will sell googly eyes at one point.
In honor of Shin Godzilla and the monster directly behind you right now, Vincent, look out.
Yes, thanks for enlightening our listeners who can't see.
Yeah, nobody else can see that. Sorry.
I do just want to, before we move on, encourage all of the Frankaholics who are listening to this episode to please buy a Camp Kaiju t-shirt. Thank you.
We appreciate that, Frank. Matt, what did you say?
I said we talk monsters. It's not as good as what you said.
Well, I mean, I think it's true. It's accurate.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes we talk googly-eyed monsters, which is fun.
There are a few funny things in this film. You got to find it where you can. What's not funny about the film is sort of where it was coming from in the cultural history of Japan and the world in the early to mid 2000s, following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami that just absolutely devastated the islands of Japan. We'll get into that a little bit more, but the tsunami then, so the earthquake happened offshore. There was a tsunami. The tsunami then damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. There were some meltdowns, and it sort of reawakened the world to the inherent apocalypse that is living on planet Earth, and that anything can happen at the drop of a hat. So with that in mind, Anno and Toho thought, we, in the spirit of the 1954 Godzilla, need to re-envision Godzilla as a metaphor for those types of fears, which, just like Honda's 54 original and 84's Return of Godzilla, Shin Godzilla was born of its time to convey the anxieties of its time. So it was carrying a lot coming into production. It was the 31st film in the Godzilla franchise. It had followed it was preceded by the 2014 Hollywood the Hollywood produced Godzilla, which was a success critically as well as commercially. So Toho was like, oh, great. Well, again, we need to kind of do something with what is our monster, right? And kind of assert that ownership over it again. So they rebooted it. They wanted to make it terrifying. They wanted to go in a whole new direction. And again, I think grounding it in the real world horrors of the day, it absolutely succeeds in that. Certainly aided by special effects, which I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these special effects. I know it kind of bleeds into our form and aesthetic, but I'll just put that out there, that the CGI and special effects warrant a whole podcast episode on themselves.
Bonus episode.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
why not? So that was my lecture. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating backstory to this movie, and I think you're totally right, Vincent. I like that you said that it's a product of its time. It talks about themes and anxieties that are born of its time, and obviously this movie only came out 6 years ago, so that's still our time. And many of the things that the original Godzilla talked about, Shin Godzilla talks about as well. In ways, I was surprised how ambitious and impassioned this movie is. I think it has a lot on its mind. It doesn't maybe all work out. Some of the themes get a little muddled, I would say. But it's very admirable, really, really fascinating, I think. So I guess the name Shin Godzilla to start off with, in terms of the themes of the film, I'm not an expert in the Japanese language, but it's kind of like a very flexible word, I think. It can mean many different things, including new, true, and God. So I think all of those things kind of like apply to this movie. Obviously it's the reboot, it's the new vision of Godzilla. And as we see the creature in this movie, it is seemingly indestructible. They talk about Godzilla as a god, kind of bringing chaos throughout the world, until, of course, the scientists are able to figure out how to stop it. So one of the thing I wanted to mention, sorry, the co-director Ano, Hideaki Anno, he talked about how he was initially kind of nervous to make the film because he didn't think that he could make anything that lived up to the original Godzilla. And I think that's really interesting because I think we can see in this version that like they are trying to emulate that in a lot of ways. I think one of the ways they're trying to sort of like match the power and the ambition and the uniqueness of the classic original 1954 Godzilla is by telling a story about the strained relationship between Japan and the United States. Of course, in the original movie, shortly after World War II, the United States occupied Japan until I believe it was 1948. Godzilla, the original Godzilla, was one of the first movies to really directly kind of condemn the United States for dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Of course, that's kind of the metaphorical power of Godzilla, that he represents nuclear destruction and everything that sort of implies. Sorry, were you going to jump in there, Vincent?
Well, I was just gonna ask, how does all that read for you guys
in the original,
or in Shin Godzilla? Like, we're saying that's a theme, but I'm just asking, does it read? Does it come across effectively in this film, that relationship between the U.S. and Japan?
I think so. I was about to say why I think that it works pretty well, if that's okay. But Frank, you can jump in if you want to and answer if you want.
No, yeah, I agree. I do think it comes across effectively, especially in the later stages of the film when, basically the U.S. is strongly encouraging them to drop a, nuclear weapon on their own city, or their own country.
Yeah.
I think that's quite effective.
Those the central the theme, like the nugget, the kernel of that theme is in those decisions where the Japanese government are seriously contemplating nuking their country.
And because of international pressure,
yeah. And it's so messed up to me. And I feel like the actors in the direction, like they treat it with the sort of respect that it deserves, the gravity of the situation, because Japan is still the only country to bear that kind of tragedy. And to do it again, it's just, tough decisions.
Yeah, it's a really compelling question. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I really like, and not to jump ahead, too much to the form and aesthetics section yet, but one thing that I noticed this time that I thought was really effective is, for most of the movie, it's just like very frantic montage. It's just like shot after shot after shot. But when they get to this part where they're, contemplating, possibly dropping the bomb on their own country, suddenly the movie slows down. And also, the background music for the most part kind of drops out and everything. And it's just kind of a more, much more like sobering tone at that point. And it really does, like you said, Vincent, just kind of help accentuate the gravity of the situation.
Yeah, it breathes. It really does take its time in those moments. Yeah. And the international pressure, Matt, what you said is just so, I don't know, like the geopolitics of this film are really thematically interesting to me. And that relationship, I feel like I've learned so much about Japanese US relations by watching Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
From the 50s through Shin Godzilla. And do you mind if I dovetail this into the movie's depiction of the defense forces, the Japanese defense forces?
No, go for it.
Okay, well, no, I'm just mentioning that, like, I just wanted to say that the depiction of the Japan self-defense forces, it seems and it is a criticism some people have of the film, is it can be quote unquote, nationalistic and pro military, sort of glorifying the weaponry involved. Did you all see that or feel that at all?
I read that criticism, but I don't really agree with it. Like, I feel like the movie's trying to say most of all that the military attempts did not work at all. Like, it sort of worked when the United States dropped these like enormous bombs, like, like Japan, the special defense forces tried to sort of knock down Godzilla. Those attempts did not work at all. The United States drops their like huge MOP missiles on it, and that sort of works a little bit, but then still like Godzilla gets right back up and like destroys all the American planes basically, and the drones. So I feel like, to me, even though I read that criticism, I don't really agree with it, because I feel like the movie is trying to say that the scientists are the ones that actually figure out how to deal with this, and also just like the dedication to work together and try to figure it out, and that like the military approach is the one that's deemed like least effective, is what I got out of the movie. That was my interpretation.
Yeah, it really comes across more that that it was like the planning of how to attack Godzilla in the end that saves the day, and also the execution of that plan, of course. But it's, yeah, and I mean, even in the end, they don't really like destroy Godzilla per se. They freeze him. So yeah, it's more of a scientific solution and not so much a like might makes right types of solution.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the question, which again I think is in the original Godzilla, of like using military weapons as like an extreme solution to stop a deadly catastrophe. Because in the original, there's I wish I remembered what it's called, the oxygen destroyer. Is that what it's called in the original movie? Which can be used to like just destroy civilizations and countries and populations, but they use it to defeat Godzilla, and then the creator of that invention destroys it as like a kind of a sacrifice in a way. And I think this movie's kind of asking the same question, like, is, nuking your own country justified if you're like stopping this monster who might destroy your entire country anyway? The movie definitely like conveys the fact that like it's not justified. That's sort of an unthinkable thing to do to your own country, and like for the international community to like expect you to do to your own country. But it asks that question, and it's a really fascinating question, especially in an era when nuclear war is possible at any moment. And like if there was a threat against your country, would you be justified to like nuke another country? Again, I think the answer would always be no, but I think like some like war hungry, like militaristic people might think the opposite way. So it's up for debate, and I think this movie does a good job of asking that question.
Well, that's the debate with nuclear weapons, that they ironically make a country safer from attack. Just in the sense that, there hasn't been a war on the scale of World War II internationally, because of the nuclear deterrent.
Mhm.
And this just made me think about the current situation with China and in that part of the world. Tensions are rising. In Japan, the conversation in Japan actually started, or really championed, by the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, kind of around the time Shin Godzilla came out, was the idea that Japan needs to take a stronger lead in the defense of the area, because they're constitutionally still barred from having an offensive military force and depend on the US for so much. People like Abe, and maybe I don't know how much of this bleeds into Shin Godzilla, but I think the argument is we need to take care of our own business. And I think that is posited by Shin Godzilla.
Totally agree. I think that's conveyed very strongly in the movie. Like even the Russia and China thing, you mentioned China just a moment ago. Russia and China are brought up in the movie. They're sort of pressuring Japan to, to take care of Godzilla in like a non-nuclear way, and then the United States is pressuring them to do the opposite. So we still almost kind of have these Cold War factions of like the US on one side and Russia and China on the other side, which I think is fascinating. And as you said, kind of reflects the geopolitics in that area right now. And I think also, like several characters in the movie talk about how they need to show that they're capable of being on the offense, of like taking care of the situation. And that's why they're willing to kind of take like this radical step of using a nuke on their own country. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the movie conveys that very directly, and with I think a lot of sort of outrage, sort of like, this is kind of a funny movie. There's a lot of satire to it. It's a lot of dark comedy, but I still think there's like a pretty strong underlying cynicism and pessimism to this movie. I did want to talk a little bit more about like some of the like treaties and like the political situation between the US and Japan, because the movie talks about that directly. It talks about the Security Treaty, which was first signed in 1951, and then there was a new version that was ratified in 1960. And Vincent, you said before that Japan is not allowed constitutionally to be on the offensive militaristically. They can only defend themselves, and they can like respond to a situation. The United States is still allowed to have military bases in Japan, and the relationship is very bilateral instead of, or supposed to be, although the United States, kind of does whatever benefits itself, which is a very pointed critique in this movie as well. So they even like read and mention a few articles from this treaty, like verbatim in the movie. I think it's articles 72 and 73, which I tried to find online, and this treaty is like hundreds of pages long, so I will not regurgitate that or anything. But like, I was amazed that they talked about that in this movie. And there's actually a couple really fascinating shots where a couple bureaucrats are talking about this, like the sort of like strained relationship and what are they going to do. And there's some text on screen, like it seems to be from the point of view of like the inside of a computer screen, or even maybe like a paper document, like looking at the characters with like all this bureaucratic jargon like foregrounded against them. It's a crazy shot, and like a really brilliant way, I think, to sort of suggest that they're just suffocated by all these treaties and political situations that don't benefit them,
There was some of the moments I laughed at was involving that bureaucratic red tape. I mean, so the satire worked 100%. Like there was a just regarding all the minutia that the film goes into with sort of that jargon, and there's just scenes of them jargoning, or just they go from one meeting to another meeting to another meeting. Someone has an idea, and then another person says, "I'll set up a meeting." It's like, no.
Yeah, and it is really funny, but it's like, obviously the underlying point is that like, millions of people probably died because they're just sitting there like trying to figure out what to do. And again, I think that was inspired by the earthquake and the tsunami in 2011 that you were talking about, Vincent, and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. That was like a nuclear plant. There was a leak. The most severe nuclear accident since Chernobyl. After that situation in 2011, that led to criticism that the plant safety directors and the government itself like didn't know how to respond to such a situation. They did not like monitor their security and their safety protocols before that happened. So, you know, the directors talked about how they were inspired by that. And I think we really see that in this sort of like angry but funny theme that like the government is inept. And if such a catastrophe or disaster were to happen in real life, Japan would be screwed and all of us would be screwed. Because like I feel like that theme kind of applies to other countries as well, you know?
Frank, did you have something before I don't want to jump in if you had something.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it kind of makes, after talking about this, it makes you wonder, like, what if a hostile country did send a nuke towards Japan or us or wherever? You can run drills all you want, but when it hits the fan, will the systems we have faith in hold true? Or will human ineptitude, human error inevitably play a part? That's a heavy question.
One thing I'll say about that, and not to take the conversation too far away from kaiju stuff or from Godzilla, but there's a really great movie. It was actually a movie made for British TV, but then got banned from British TV for being too horrifying. In 1965, the director Peter Watkins made a movie called The War Game, which was based on like these. Basically, he took these British documents that were these British government documents that were designed to basically say what they would do in the event of a nuclear fallout. And basically the movie is him just demonstrating how like woefully unprepared they would be if that actually happened. So it's kind of sort of like a fake documentary style where it's like, okay, here's like what happens if London actually gets bombed, and then he just goes through like step by step, like, okay, here's the policy and here's why this falls horribly short, and would just make this a complete nightmare for everybody involved. So that's a really interesting movie for anyone who's interested in those themes of nuclear devastation and just how the government would respond to it and just how unprepared humanity is for it in general.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and Shin Godzilla is kind of like the kaiju version of that, I think, I think there's a little bit more like satire in the movie, and it is like very entertaining, obviously, and very fun at times, but yeah, again, I think there's a lot of pessimism and cynicism underlying the movie for that very reason. Like, it's a theme that applies, I think, to any country where it's like, yeah, if you're faced with like imminent destruction, like any protocols that you have in place are going to seem insufficient and lackluster, which is kind of a scary thought.
Yeah. We'll leave that there then.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess just moving on to the, are we ready to move on to the form and aesthetic of the movie?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Yeah. So Matt already kind of brought up, just kind of some of the wild camera angles in this movie, like the one where there's the political documents that are sort of in the foreground with the actors behind them. Also, like point of view shots from computers and phones and just other bizarre areas. And it's all done in this really rapid montage style that, like, probably the most rapid montage that I can remember, or the most consistently rapid montage that I can remember seeing anywhere outside of like, the old like Soviet montage movies like Battleship Potemkin and stuff like that. It really is kind of that style of just one shot after another, to the point where I was curious to know like how many total shots there are in this movie. I didn't find anything on that, but that would be an interesting thing to know. yeah, so that's kind of how the movie moves along. Like you were saying, it is kind of a satire, and part of that satire about the bureaucracy involves, like, every time you see a new character, there's a title on the screen listing their official title, and as the movie goes on, there's sort of a dry joke that the official titles just seem to keep getting longer and longer, like to the point where sometimes they're like 5 or 6 lines of text long, and they're only on the screen for like 10 seconds, so you can't even like possibly read what the person's official title is, which is really interesting. But I think that that having all of these characters coming at you so rapidly really does, like I said earlier, kind of help to convey like the enormity of the situation, and just how big the scope of the crisis is, while also simultaneously allowing for that satire about all of the layers of red tape that the characters are trying to work through, or all of the people who are trying to push things from one department to the jurisdiction of another department so that they don't get blamed for it, or whatever. So the movie, I think, like, very successfully kind of balances humor and action and drama at the same time in that way, which I think is really effective. And then also we had already talked a little bit about the kind of the mix of special effects, how most of it's CGI, and then there's a little bit in terms of a little bit of like animatronics and puppetry involved at certain times too, which is a little bit odd at times. Sometimes you'll get like a shot where Godzilla looks a certain way, and then you get like a reverse shot where he kind of looks different, even like before he's evolving into different forms and stuff. So the special effects, I think, are a little inconsistent. There's some stuff that's really interesting. Like especially the first form of Godzilla looks just like totally insane. It's got a crazy face with googly eyes and everything.
Yeah. Can I ask? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
What did you think about that take on Godzilla, that Godzilla now has 3 forms or 4 forms? It has different stages of evolution. I think that's such a honestly, it's a drastic change. I think it works. I just wanted to see what your thoughts on it were.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome idea, and it does, even though I do think that the visuals in the movie are ultimately a little too inconsistent for my liking, it does make the movie dynamic, and it and Godzilla does become more threatening as the movie goes on, which is effective too. Like, in the first form you see, he's almost, even though he's causing all this destruction, he's kind of like cute, and just like wacky looking. But then, by the end, he's like very fearsome and scary. And yeah, I think it does a good job of building up the drama.
I agree. It's an awesome concept. I feel like, Frank, you just touched on this, but like the movie is able to like combine its political themes, which are pretty ambitious, I think, and its sense of humor and its satire with just like awesome kaiju like special effects. Not all of them work, but like still the transformation scenes are like kind of trippy and like very, very intense sometimes. And Frank, maybe you were about to touch on this, but there are just some like shots of like Godzilla like staring down the camera with like a dark sky in the background, which are just so intense and ominous. I love the concept, and I think it works really well for the most part.
Yeah.
And also, Frank, I was gonna follow up on one thing that you said, just like how, like wondering how many shots are actually in this movie and how many camera setups and stuff like that. And like some of those camera setups, they seemingly had to like find a new location, get like, I don't know, 50 actors there. And then like the shot that we see in the final movie is maybe like 5 seconds long, which is just like an insane level of like organization and ambition. And like they must have had to set up that scene for like, I don't know, at least half a day, maybe a couple days for like a couple seconds of screen time, It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and this sounds like a weird comparison, but when I was watching this the other day, I was sort of reminded almost of like a Wes Anderson movie or something, where you get these like really meticulously laid out shots that, like you said, look like they would just take forever to set up and just use up all these resources, and then they're on screen for like a split second.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's really impressive. Yeah, the scope of this movie is just way beyond what I would have expected when my brother originally invited me to go see it with him.
That's so
Yeah.
true. And I could see the Wes Anderson comparison. I could see that coupled with, for me, I was getting this very real, right, quote unquote real aesthetic that the movie gives. Like what would actually happen, and how would it what would it actually look like? Which for me reminded me, when Batman Begins came out, that was sort of like the popular thing with superhero movies. Like, let's make it real. Air quotes around that. And I kind of feel like that's sort of the direction with Shin Godzilla, because the preceding Godzilla films, 2014 notwithstanding, they were still very in the vein of like comic booky and very science fiction based. I think Shin Godzilla really grounds itself in that realism.
What's nice though is that while it grounds itself in that realism, so often I think when people say that something is grounded and realistic, or a more adult take on material or whatever, it just kind of means that it's like dark and stoic and sometimes not particularly stylish. And this movie I think is a lot more vibrant and yeah, just very stylistically bold and interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think the humor goes a long way with that as well. Sort of that that Wes Anderson maybe type of feel. It's also interesting that Shin Godzilla makes use of social media, which doesn't seem like a big deal now, but it's the first Godzilla movie made, I think, in the true social media atmosphere. So you have those found footage, which, like in Cloverfield, which did not come out too long before, the found footage was with a camcorder. It was not social media, right? So I thought that adds a flair of contemporary culture to it.
That's a good point. And I usually kind of hate it when movies are like, show like Facebook posts and Instagram posts on screen. Like it just kind of annoys me. But I feel like because this movie moves so quickly, like I think it works really well. Like you're already kind of set up for this like breathless, like very, very rapid, like many different characters and like subplots and perspectives. I feel like the social media angle actually works kind of well for that reason. It didn't seem like jarring or out of place to me in this movie. Yeah, I just think it works really well.
Yeah, it's like how people would actually respond to it in real life. Like there's that scene early on where there's kind of that like drive-through tunnel thing that's being flooded in, and they're showing that people are being rescued, and there's the one guy who's I think supposed to be putting his video on Facebook or whatever, of him, like he's like, they give us a slide or whatever, and he's like going down a slide that they're rescuing him from. And that is that is how people would pretty much respond to that type of situation, because what else are you going to do, I guess. So
yeah.
There's another moment too where they figure out something about Godzilla. I can't remember if it's like the nuclear irradiation that it spreads, but like before the end of the scene, like other people are talking about it on social media, so it got like leaked from their like government top secret, also with air quotes, like room or whatever, which also like extends the satire a little bit. Like they can't even keep this like classified information in the room for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all works really well.
Totally. Was there anything else we wanted to comment on? And it's totally cool. We're at a great place with our time right now. We're at 50 minutes. I'm happy going even 20 more minutes. We're at a great place. So indulge if you wish.
I'm ready for the good, the bad, and the campy if you guys are.
Yeah, I think we can indulge in that part of the podcast a little bit.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, Matt, you want to take us away?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, again, I really enjoyed this movie. I think its ability to combine ambitious, often very political themes with kind of this like dark satirical sense of humor, which is very funny, but also like pretty cynical underneath that, with this kind of crazy visual style and this amazing, problematic, but like overall very bold and unique style. Extremely impressive. Like, I feel like this movie's setting out to do a lot, and it mostly accomplishes it. Just in terms of like sheer awesomeness, like there are a lot of moments like that in this movie, and I think it's the moment when Godzilla first emerges from the sea. I think that's when we see it in its third form. Maybe it's the second. Yeah, no, it's the third form after it awakens from its second form, I think. And the old Akira Ifukube like classic boom 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 score that starts playing at that moment. Like, it's just so cool that this movie is able to do so much and still provide moments like that for like true Godzilla kaiju fans. It's extremely impressive. I loved it.
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway. Like, not only is it an attempt at something new, something which, but which it does well, but it also not only incorporates Ifukube's score so well with the original score, which is so operatic and chilling. Like, underneath the scenes of destruction, you have that chanting, that operatic chanting. It gave me goosebumps. Horrifyingly frightening, while also Godzilla, the Godzilla's roar in this film is taken from the original Showa era Godzilla. So it's like a weird thing where it sounds like the Godzilla we've come to know and love and trust and we're comforted by, but it's juxtaposed with the most horrific imagery I've seen. Like, Godzilla is truly frightening to me in this film. He looks like a demon, and it's just a weird juxtaposition between sight and sound that I think is really effective in scaring me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
sorry,
I didn't mean to cut you off, Matt.
No, not at all. After you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, as far as the good, it's a lot of what we've already talked about. But yeah, just the really aggressive editing, I think, is just so interesting, and just really keeps the movie at this like exciting pace. And like I said, it allows to kind of really convey like the urgency and the scope of this crisis that they're dealing with, while also simultaneously allowing for all of that satire about how ridiculous it is that there's all these different channels that everybody has to go through to get anything done, or in some cases to like avoid getting anything done, basically.
Yeah, it conveys that theme extremely well. Yeah. And Vincent, I was just going to respond to your comment about how like this is the Godzilla who we know and trust and love in some ways, because it looks and sounds sort of familiar in some ways. Like Godzilla kind of like veered away from its original sort of like ominous, like doomsday, like metaphor for destruction type thing, and became sort of like a cuddly hero a little bit after a while. I love Ghidorah the three-headed monster, but I feel like it sort of starts happening around that time. So I just really admire that this movie seems to be saying like, no, we're going to take Godzilla back to its like terrifying roots. Like, this is not a cuddly hero. This is like a creature of destruction, which seems like really well suited for this like current geopolitical moment in the 21st century, and is also, just as we've said several times, legitimately scary, I think.
Yeah. What didn't you guys like about this movie?
For me, again, I kind of touched on it earlier, but the special effects I feel are really inconsistent. Like, even like within one scene, sometimes it's like it I don't know, that's where ironically, like, the part of this movie that falls a little short for me is the kaiju stuff. Like, I think that the human stuff and just seeing how they're responding to this crisis is, to me, what's most interesting in this movie. And I think the kaiju stuff, primarily because of the special effects, just falls a little short for me. Although I do like, having said that, I do really like the final scene where they're, driving the trains into him and everything. I think that's a really cool idea. But yeah, for me, it's the actual action is not as exciting as the other stuff that's going on around it.
Yeah, we didn't we may have, forgive me if we touched on it, but the special effects was a combination of suitmation, right? Or motion capture, I should say. And also just, I guess, traditional CGI. I am not expert enough to tell which is which, but I think for me, because I understand like sometimes it looked really good, and then sometimes it was a little obvious that it was computer generated. And I feel, my hunch is that the parts that look really, really good was probably the motion capture actor stuff.
Yeah, I would guess so as well. Yeah.
And I think like when it tries to show like huge wide scale devastation, like up close and personal, it's not very convincing. Like I remember a moment when like a lot of cars are like kind of coming towards the screen when the monster is like swiping them all out of its way. And it looks kind of cheap. It's not very convincing. But then like later on we have these shots, and this is probably what you're alluding to maybe, of like, Godzilla in the distance, and we see like a bunch of smoke and fire and the like city skyline in the background. Like those shots are incredible, and I think they're really well done. So I feel like when the movie kind of opts for suggestion and like uh subtlety maybe is not the right word for it, but like when it doesn't try to show the devastation in like huge close-up detail, I think it's a lot more convincing.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Just for the bad category, there's not a lot for me, but I would just add that the movie does start to feel pretty long towards the end. It's 2 hours long, which is not terrible, but I just think like the sheer number of like subplots and characters can be pretty exhausting and sort of confusing. I do think that's like partially intentional, and it like conveys what the movie's trying to do, like just show again that like all of these people are trying to solve the situation, and most of them are very, very bad at it and just like fumbling the situation. So I think that's intentional, but it also does start to feel pretty long towards the end. And I would also just say that there are a couple of moments when like the themes are presented through like very literal dialogue, very on the nose, which tends to bother me when that happens. A couple example lines of dialogue are: "Man is more terrifying than Godzilla," "Nuclear wisdom is the only way," and "Spreading knowledge works." Those were 3 lines where I was like, all right, a little too on the nose maybe, but that's a little nitpicky. I'm very glad that they have like so many themes and ideas, but presented it lonely sometimes.
No, I hear you, and this kind of just segues into my bad pick. In terms of I think the movie can lose steam a little bit, maybe halfway through, maybe 3/4 of the way through, when we get the satire, right? We've gotten it by this point. So for me, I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, the flip side of focusing on the satire of the bureaucratic tangle is that we don't become invested in any particular human story. That's not a great way to put it. I'll just say, like, to compare it to Honda's 54 Godzilla, we see the ground level effects of Godzilla's rampage. We see mother and children who have lost loved ones. Like, we get that very immediate, poignant social human cost, which is lacking in Shin Godzilla. For better or for worse, I think it works to focus on the satire. With that said, I do think we lose a little bit of the real tragedy. Again, if we are comparing it to the 2011 earthquake and tsunami and nuclear disaster, upwards of 20,000 people were killed. And what were those stories? What are those stories that we're not getting in Shin Godzilla?
Yeah, that didn't even really occur to me. But yeah, there's really not much that you see in the movie in terms of death. I mean, there's the part where the aircraft that's carrying like the prime minister and some other people is blown up, but yeah, you're right. You really don't see much of anything in this movie as far as people sort of like cowering in fear or even getting killed by Godzilla. You see like buildings being destroyed and cars being turned over and stuff like that. But yeah, there really is almost none of that, is there?
Yeah, I think it's a valid critique for sure. There's one very brief moment that sticks out to me where like a building, a skyscraper is about to be toppled. And there's just like a very brief scene where we see like two parents and like a baby trying to get out of there, but they're not able to. And the building sort of like starts to fall over and then they like fall to the other side of the room kind of. And then the scene cuts, so we don't really know what happens to them, but presumably they die very tragic and horrible deaths. But that's like one of the only moments that I can think of, and it like along those lines, and it really stands out for that reason. I think the movie could maybe use more of them.
Yeah, it kind of falls into like now that we're talking about like the generic city destruction that you see in like Marvel movies. Like New York City has just been leveled, but we're not going to address the millions of people who just got wiped from the face of the earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, this is probably a conversation for another time, but just like movies' fascination with like, the destruction of cities. Like, I just feel like you could write like a thesis about that, and like why that is, whether it's like Hollywood or kaiju movies or whatever. I feel like there's some, I don't know, very dark wish, maybe not wish fulfillment, but just like this paranoia, this fear that's with us all the time, But yeah, it's frustrating that like we get all this destruction, which is mostly CGI, but we don't really feel the human cost of it for the most part.
Right. As good as it looks, and I think it looks amazing. I think I'm just gonna head to the transition to the downright campy, if that's cool.
Yeah.
So I already mentioned googly eyes. I thought that's intentionally camp. I think that's really funny, that juxtaposition. There, Frank, you mentioned the titles of the workers getting longer and longer. I noticed that too, and I meant to like try to find an example of it. I couldn't, but I was laughing out loud to myself when we got to that point.
I think that's an intentional joke, but it's so dry that it's not really, you could easily imagine someone watching the movie and not laughing at it or whatever. But I thought it was very funny. Yeah.
But that's the humor. It's so dry. And case in point, the prime minister, it's when the disasters happen and he's got to put on his like blue windbreaker because that's it. And they call it a costume at one point. And then his whole cabinet are wearing these blue windbreakers. And don't you see that in real life? After a real life, like suddenly the president is wearing a baseball cap and a windbreaker. It's like, that's absurd.
It feels sort of like realistically absurd,
Yeah.
Like that would happen probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, that's all I had. It was hard for this film, I'll admit.
I agree. The only scene that like got close to camp for me, although I feel like it's more like fan appreciation or like kind of like a little nugget for the fans or whatever, is like when they're talking about the name Godzilla or Gojira, when they're talking about Goro Maki's research and like they find that name in there and like none of them have ever heard of it before and they talk about like where that name comes from. And I thought, it's like a little nod to the history of the franchise, but like obviously this is a reboot, so nobody's heard of it before. It's not campy per se, but I feel like it's one of the few moments where like the movie gives a little concession to the fans and like recognizes that this is part of like a long-standing legacy,
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got for the campy section, and it's not even really camp. So I don't know.
But it's nice. It's a nice thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much for campy either. I guess you could put the some of the English speaking actors into that camp. Although that might belong more in just the bad, but but yeah, some of those people, I just had the impression that they just, I don't know, were English speaking people who the filmmakers happen to know who are not trained actors or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some really bad scenes, and well, not bad full scenes, but bad moments with those characters, especially that one I talked about earlier with the where they're on the plane, the president and the like envoy to the president.
Yeah.
And it feels almost campier that we never see his face. Like he's, kind of like we see close-ups of his hand and stuff like that. Like he's sort of like the claw from Inspector Gadget or something. It's a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah,
That's true.
President Ross.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
The most generic sort of white American name you could think of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the lack of camp, like I was surprised like the level of like care and dedication and like we talked about before, like seriousness without seeming like dark and serious all the time. Like I feel like that really does distinguish this movie quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, definitely a movie that has more in its mind than you would expect.
Yeah.
So how would you guys rank this film?
I can start if you like, or Frank,
Yeah.
if you want to, you can go ahead.
Or Matt,
I'll
you
go
can
ahead,
you
Matt.
can go through our time honored script.
Yeah, my favorite part of the podcast. So yeah, we do generally have 4 different ratings. The highest rating is it's a timeless classic. It definitely stands the test of time. Of course, this movie's only about 6 years old, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. The second rating is there may be some antiquated moments, but overall it's great and it stands the test of time. Excuse me. The third rating is it may be historically significant or just fun, but does not stand the test of time. And the worst rating that we have on Camp Kaiju, it is not worth revisiting. It definitely does not stand the test of time. So for me, I was hovering between the top 2 ratings. Like this is in many ways like just such an impressive, genuinely very well made, really distinct, very powerful, stylish, all that stuff. I think not all of it works. I think like the some of the CGI, some of the special effects, the English speaking scenes, it starts to get a little bit long towards the end. I think I have to put this in the second rating. There may be some antiquated or just like flawed moments, but overall it is still great and it does stand the test of time.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I would give it the same rating. I think for me, if the kaiju scenes were done in the old-fashioned way with like the suit, or even I guess if you wanted to update it a little bit and do the motion capture thing, but just kept that consistent, and you did that with like the scale models and everything, I think that would put it over the top to me and make it a timeless classic. I do think it's one of the most interesting kaiju movies I've ever seen, certainly stylistically and in terms of just how ambitious it is and the huge scope of it. But yeah, there are a few of those aspects that fall short, particularly for me in all of the action scenes.
All right. Wow. I hear you guys on all that. I'm gonna say that I think it is a timeless classic. Now we'll see, we should revisit this in 6 years time, but I do think it stands the test of time. I love the reimagining of such a classic, culturally embedded figure as Godzilla, and I love the imagery. I liked seeing the CGI when it was done well. You're able to see Godzilla in a lot of different shots that you wouldn't be able to normally with the suit, coupled with the score and the design of the creature. That puts it over the top for me. And the satire, though it does get a little worn by the end, it's so maddening that I was feeling something for the whole movie. So timeless classic for me.
I'm glad somebody gave it the highest rating, even though I didn't. Like, I definitely understand why could be deserving of that acclaim. So thank you, Vincent.
Yeah, and it's definitely a movie that I would feel comfortable recommending to like just anyone who wants to see an interesting movie. I think it's an ambitious and interesting movie that probably isn't on a lot of people's radars as an ambitious or interesting movie. And if my brother hadn't asked me to go see it that one time when it, the one night it happened to be playing in Milwaukee, I probably wouldn't be aware of it either. But yeah, it's a movie that has a lot more to offer just beyond the usual kaiju stuff.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about Shin Ultraman?
Now I want to watch it.
Yeah, Anno is following up with that. I think they have announced an international release for it. Dates and locations are still TBD, but it will come to North America sometime soon.
That's awesome. I have high expectations now, considering how much I like this one.
Yeah, right. Me too.
Yeah, I never actually seen Ultraman. Like I'm familiar with how Ultraman looks, and I don't know if it's going to be anything like Shin Godzilla. I'm definitely interested to see it. And there's going to be a Shin Kamen Rider as well, right?
Yes, a character I am wholly unfamiliar with, but I'm eager to learn.
Yeah, I just clicked on the Wikipedia page for Shin Kamen Rider. It looks like he's like an insect, possibly like a human-sized insect.
And he rides a motorcycle too. I
rides
think.
a motorcycle. Yeah,
he's like
That
a
sounds
superhero.
cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Here's the premise according to Wikipedia. College student and motorcycle enthusiast Takeshi Hongo is abducted by the evil organization Sustainable Happiness Organization with computational knowledge embedded remodeling, otherwise known as Shocker, and converted into the cyborg Beta Augment 01 as part of their plans for world domination. Before they can brainwash him to do their bidding, he escapes and uses his new enhanced abilities, renaming himself as Kamen Rider, to wage a one-man war against Shocker.
I'm here
That
for it.
sounds awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Release
do it.
date March 2023. In
Shin-
Japan, at least.
Shin
Who knows what
Universe, it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like these reboots are in good hands if if Anno has a role in directing future iterations, which obviously he does. I'm excited to see them.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
he's listed as the writer and director of the sole writer and director of Shin Kamen Rider, at least.
Okay. Maybe Shin Power Rangers will enter the scene at some point.
One can only hope.
Frank, thank you so much, man. I hope, I know Matt does. I personally hope you enjoy this and are willing to come back at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This is really fun to do. Really enjoyed revisiting the movie and really enjoyed talking with you guys about it. And I know that all of the Frankaholics out there enjoyed it as well. So shout out to all them.
And there will be many more Frankaholics after this episode as well.
Yeah.
Start a fan club.
Yeah.
Thank you all, Frankaholics and others, for hanging out at Camp Kaiju. Please follow us on whatever social media platform you want, especially your podcasts and YouTube if you're watching too. We appreciate it. Again, if you like what you hear, rate, review, and tell a friend. We appreciate it. All the support. And until next time, stay campy and
The end.
That's
Strong
it.
ending.
We'll
Yeah.
see you for Prey in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All right,
ya.
thanks, guys. Talk to you
Thanks.
later.
Bye.